Get into it. 1, 2, 3. Let's get some more. Have it in. Get some more. Just get some more.
So as you guys know, obviously with the virus going on, all the distilleries have shut down their tours, etc. Everything in most places is down to essential personnel. Here at Spirits of French Lick, we're going to keep rolling as long as we can until it either looks like it's too dangerous to keep going or one of us gets sick, you know, and hopefully none of us get sick. That's what we're praying for. But, you know, I've never been much of a social butterfly, but I will tell you that I do miss giving tours. I love talking to people, having them here at the distillery and telling them about the passionate things that we do here and how we do them and why we do them. So it's important to me because I'm not doing any festivals or anything like that right now, and who knows for how long I'm not going to be doing that stuff at this point. It's important to me to reach out to our fans and our friends and tell them a little bit about what we've got going on. So first and foremost, before I get into tours, I usually like to talk about some of the history of distilling in southern Indiana because a lot of people don't know that history. So everything we do here at Spirits of French Lick is based on the history of distilling in Hoosier-occupied northern Kentucky. So the very first distiller that we know of in southern Indiana was a man named John Fleener, located just north of Salem, Indiana. Came there in about 1806 or so, when it was still frontier. And John had come from a family of distillers back in Virginia. Before that, they could trace their ancestry back to the Black Forest of Germany. They had a long tradition of making brandies and rye whiskey, and of course when they got to the Ohio Valley, they had corn here. And so they went into making corn whiskey. So like many other early distillers, Mr. Fleener was actually a preacher distiller. He was a deacon technically. That was pretty common in those days, and really the distilling industry in southern Indiana flourished you know, in the early 1800s because of preacher distillers. A lot of people think that that's sort of incongruent, but it's not. If you think about it, it's actually one of the most it makes more sense than almost any job you can have at that time, because these early preachers, they didn't have churches that they were preaching out of. They were traveling preachers. A lot of them were Campbellite preachers, some Methodist, etc. They were going from place to place on horse. They would get there. They might be doing last rites. They might be doing a marriage ceremony. They might be holding church wherever. But they saw a need for actual church buildings, and the community saw a need for actual church buildings. So the easiest way in order to raise money to build those churches was by selling liquor. So many of those early preacher distillers immediately saw, hey, we can make some money and build some churches off some liquor. And it also puts you in a position as a preacher that if you see someone who has a problem, you're the one selling them liquor on Saturday, you know they have an issue, so you know who you need to talk to on Sunday to kind of straighten that out if you see somebody slipping down the slide. So most, again, of the early distillers in southern Indiana were those preacher distillers. Most of them were also German. So southern Indiana, there's a 6-county region, what we call the Black Forest of southern Indiana, Washington, Orange, Lawrence, Crawford, Harrison, and Perry County, where that area became known as the Black Forest of southern Indiana due to the German distillers and all the brandy that was being made in that region. By 1855, each of those 6 counties, if you go into the agricultural census records, had upwards of 155,000 apple trees apiece. These apples weren't really known cultivars the way that you think of them now. They were grown from seed left over from the distilling process. No 2 apple trees would have been exactly the same at that time. They weren't even really used for cider at that time. Cider was never a big thing in southern Indiana. It was always a big thing. Applejack brandy and apple brandy were the big things in southern Indiana. Of course, if you get into the bourbon history, you'll know that bourbon doesn't really become a recognized category until the mid-1820s. So southern Indiana sits on the same limestone. We have the same minerals in our water, same pH in our water as Kentucky. We have almost just as long of a history of distilling as Kentucky. We just unfortunately didn't have the publicist that they had after Prohibition. So, you know, a lot of the liquor was shipped out of Maysville, Kentucky. You know, obviously Bourbon County was a big deal. But the other thing that you have to understand is that from the southern Indiana side of things and from the southern Ohio side of things, in order to get down the river and miss the Falls of the Ohio, you had to actually cross the river over to the Kentucky side to ship your product out. So while all that bourbon was flowing out of Kentucky, nobody knows how much of it was actually coming out of southern Indiana, southern Ohio, crossing the river, and then going downstream. If you go to MGP, those guys will tell you that London Deadlaw were probably distilling as early as 1802, and they may very well have been, but we have no actual written record that that's when they started distillation at Lawrenceburg, Indiana. So for right now, Washington County's taking the victory on the first known distiller that we can prove was actually distilling in southern Indiana. So between 1855 and 1914, in that 6-county region, the Black Forest of southern Indiana, there were 155 operational distilleries, making apple brandy as well as making bourbon, well, whiskey, whatever you want to call it. Mostly wheated bourbons. Rye was never a real big thing up here for whatever reason. Wheat seemed to be the preferential grain, at least in our region. So between 1877 and 1914, southern Indiana's 6-county region that was called the Black Forest of southern Indiana, the 2 tax districts that were there, were actually the largest producer of apple brandy in the entire world. We were making more than northern France was at that time. It was considered a higher quality. One of the reasons it's considered a higher quality is because it was an apple mash brandy. So as opposed to just taking their apple juice, fermenting that into wine, and then double pot distilling it, they're actually taking the whole apple, grinding the whole thing up, cooking it in with limestone water, and fermenting the whole thing and distilling it. So, unfortunately, a number of things came together to sort of destroy the distilling industry here in southern Indiana. The big problem that we had, the first big problem that we experienced in the state, was that around 1862, Abraham Lincoln implemented an excise tax. Now, there had been 2 previous excise taxes before that, but both happened before Indiana ever became a state. We had one during the Revolutionary War, one during the War of 1812. So, unfortunately, or fortunately, as it were, you had a culture of Germans here who had been distilling here for 60 years, roughly, who considered distilling their birthright, and much like in Pennsylvania, they weren't going to put up with a whiskey tax if they didn't have to, or they were going to find a way to get around it. So, what a lot of them did, because of the way the laws were set up, is they went underground, became moonshiners, or they played both sides of it. They might have been legal distillers in one location and illicit distillers in another location. The way that excise tax was set up was incredibly unfair to the small producers, because most of these small brandy producers were only producing, even at the height of things, between 300 to 1,200 barrels a year on average, which doesn't sound like a lot, but let me put it in perspective for you with apple brandy. With apple brandy, you're talking about 1 to 4 bushels of apples to make 1 gallon of brandy. So from August until January every year, these guys are running 24/7, just trying to get through everything that they possibly could. When this excise tax came in, they were trying to favor large distillers, and they wanted to kind of put the small distillers out of business, basically. And the way that they did that is that they gave 2 different tax rates. So there was the normal tax rate for the larger producers, and then there was a secondary tax rate for quote-unquote distillers of fruit brandies, or brandy from fruit, spirits from fruit, etc. And the way that it was worded was that it was based not on what you were actually making, but it was based on what you could make. So if you're a little guy out here, got a little orchard, little 40-gallon still, they're going to come in and they're going to say to you, all right, we know that you got this 40-gallon still. We know that you could run that 40-gallon still twice a day, every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And if you did that, here's how much you would make. That's how much tax we expect from you. So immediately a lot of them go underground. Long, long history of it in Washington County, Orange, Crawford, Harrison, Perry, etc. The other thing that happens is some of the distillers that were here at that time, let's take Orange County here where we're at, where Spirits of French Lick is located. On the other side of the county is a township called Stampers Creek Township. Over in Stampers Creek Township, there were 9 commercial distilleries that operated. The 2 big ones were the Wolf Distillery and the Mccoy Distillery. The Wolfs and the McCoys were both interrelated. They were also related to Solomon Scott, who ran, for a time, the distillery over at what is now Spring Mill, Indiana. All the local distillers were very closely interrelated to one another. Anyways, the Wolfs had been here since 1818 and had distilled for 2 generations in a place called Stillhouse Hollow. They had an old distillery down there built out of stone. It's out in the middle of nowhere. In 1862, about the time the tax passed, the Wolfs claimed that that distillery burned to the ground. They then went down to where they were building a new turnpike through the county, and they built a fancy new distillery that was much larger than the original distillery. This was right on the turnpike where anybody could find it, right? So that's their legal distillery. Meanwhile, the old distillery never actually burnt down. It was still there and it was still operational. It was less than a half mile away from the legal distillery that was down on the road. those guys were playing both sides of it. They're making illicit brandy on one side of the hill and legal brandy on the other side of the hill. The other thing that you'll find from researching the old Southern Indiana distilleries is that a lot of them, even if they were legal, were way off the beaten path. And the reason for that is because they were small, which is again the reason that the federal government wanted to put them out of business. And because they were small, the federal government could not afford generally to have a storekeeper or an excise man there. So for that entire 6-county region, minus 1 or 2 distilleries, there was one excise officer, and that excise officer was not even based in one of those counties. He was down in Floyd County in New Albany. So they knew that even if he came up here and got looking around, he's not going to get that far away from the railroad. The railroad was just starting to really move through, in the mid-1850s. So by, 1862, it's rolling through. He's not going to get too far away from the railroad. So they very purposely put everything out of the way so that you'd have to know where to go to look for it. And for every every 1 barrel that was taxed, there were probably 3 barrels made that were not taxed. Fortunately, around the same time in 1862, there was a group of men who were sort of plotting against the United States. They were peace Democrats. 2 big ones were Horace Heffron, who was from Salem, Indiana, who owned the Salem Democrat newspaper, and Mr. William Bowles, who was here in French Lick, who owned the original, West Baden, who owned the original West Baden Hotel. Both of those 2 men were tried for treason at the time. Their plan was that they were going to have Governor Oliver P. Morton killed and replace him with a sympathetic governor, vice governor, lieutenant governor here in Indiana. And they were going to then release all of the prisoners of war from up in the northern military camps here in Indiana, give them access to the Indiana Armory, and send them back down south to fight the war. These guys were running something called the Knights of the Golden Circle. You may or may not be familiar with that. A lot of them got folded into and were also founding members of what became the KKK. Now, when they get arrested for treason, they get sent to jail, but they more or less get a little slap on the wrist. They're back out in a few months, and somehow in this state, they ended up back in the state legislature in a couple years. Unfortunately for the distillers, these guys were all very strict temperance followers. They thought that liquor was destroying the white culture. And so they start as early as 1877 implementing all kinds of asinine temperance laws. So the very first one they implement basically states that myself and anyone else out there, another man out there, are out drinking. And I get running my mouth because I do that sometimes. And he kills me. Maybe I deserve it, maybe I don't. He doesn't get in any trouble. The person who sold him the liquor doesn't get in any trouble. The person who distilled the liquor gets in trouble. And they literally interpret this as tightly as what they can, to the extent that they use this as an excuse to come in and shut down distilleries, take their equipment, destroy their product, and put them 100% out of business. So, by 1914, everybody sees that Prohibition is coming along. Everybody knows it's a joke. Everybody knows it won't work. They just don't know how long it'll last. And at that time, you're basically dealing with a lot of farm distillers still. So these guys have done nothing but farm and distill their whole life. That's all they know. Some of them are going to go on and become moonshiners during Prohibition. Other ones are going to have to farm commodity crops. Everybody drives through the 6-county region now and they go, well, where are all the orchards at? They don't exist anymore for a couple reasons. Again, these are primarily farm distillers. So if their apples are no good to eat out of hand, all they're good for is making brandy, they're going to cut their apple trees down and plant corn or whatever they need to get through the next coming years. The other part about that is, in Indiana, during Prohibition, if you were a moonshiner and you got caught making fruit brandy and you had an orchard, not only did they come in and destroy your stills, get rid of all your equipment, get rid of all your product, fine you, possibly put you in jail, send you to the work farm, etc., they would actually cut down your fruit trees and burn them and put you out of business. So in 1914, a couple other things are happening. So the KKK has become a bigger entity. A lot of the distillers are falling to the mercy of the KKK in southern Indiana. The KKK is doing what they're known for doing to minorities, unfortunately, but they're doing them to distillers as well, burning crosses in their yard, trying to scare them out of the business, etc. At the same time, all the gangsters in the United States are looking around and going, hey, this Prohibition thing, it's going to work out all right for us. And so they're moving, especially here into into French Lick at the time. And what they're doing is they're coming in and they want to control everything. They're going to use French Lick and West Baden, this little resort town in the middle of nowhere, as a place for all the gangsters to meet up with all the distillers in Kentucky and Indiana and move their product illicitly. Unfortunately, they're also going to try to strong arm all the small guys that are running 10, 20, 30, 40 gallon stills and either put them out of business and or bring them into the operation. So that scares a lot of them out of it. Now, at that time, there wasn't a whole lot. Excuse me just a second, we'll turn this pump down. Dad. It is a working distillery. So, anyways, by the time Prohibition rolls around, a couple of unfortunate things happen. So the Wolfs and the McCoys, both who had been in operation throughout the 1800s, they take their barrels down to, at that time, the old APH Stitzel Distillery, which is where the warehouses were that were going to hold on to the material during Prohibition. Both families had about 300 barrels of apple brandy apiece. They take their barrels down, they drop them off. Both intend to get back into distilling after Prohibition ends. At the end of Prohibition, unfortunately, all of their barrels were completely emptied. Somebody had stolen every drop of liquor out of every one of those barrels that was there on site, and that put both those families out of business permanently. Now, in Prohibition here in the what we call the Valley, where French Lick and West Baden is, there were 9 hotels and casinos. What you may or may not know is none of those casinos were ever legal until the one that's here now. The Indiana State Police was actually put together to some extent to sort of police this area and kind of keep it under control. During Prohibition, Charles Edward Ballard ended up owning all 9 of those hotels and casinos. And I don't know what kind of badass that Ballard was, but all the gangsters were here. None of the gangsters ever owned anything, including Al Capone. He never owned anything here, he just did business here. And you've heard all the stories about him, so you can imagine how Ballard was. One of the guys that they had problems with here locally was a guy named Chester Smith, lived out by Tucker Lake. Chester was a factory worker, and Chester ran a little 10-gallon still to help take care of his family. He also moved some shine out of Du Bois County, up there where they make what they call Jasper corn, or Du Bois County Dew. And Chester got on the wrong side of the gangsters at one point in time, and they called the law on him. He got back into it after he got through the work camp, etc. Eventually, he got tired of that, and long and short of it is that he went down to the Brown Hotel early one morning in his car, and threw a stick of dynamite through the front window of the Brown Hotel and blew the front side lobby off the Brown Hotel. He didn't hurt anybody, didn't kill anybody. But after that, they basically said, all right, nobody fucks with Chester anymore. Chester's crazy. Leave him alone, let him sell us 3 gallons every week, whatever he needs. So, unfortunately, Indiana never really recovered from Prohibition. A couple of the bigger distilleries did continue on to whatever extent they could. The 2 big ones were the Krogman Distillery over in Tell City, and then the Alexander Sterling and David Kemper Distillery, which was actually the largest brandy distillery in the United States at that time, and at one point in time it was the largest brandy distillery in the world, which was located in New Amsterdam down in Harrison County. They continued on for a few years, but all of them were out of business by the 1960s, short of MGP, who kept the lights on for all of us. So everything that we're doing here at Spirits of French Lick is all about bringing those traditions back, those old methodologies back, and putting them to the forefront. My background, for those of you who don't know, is in illicit distillation, home distilling. Read that however you'd like to. I grew up on a tobacco farm, got very interested in distilling when I was about 15 or so. And Dad and Grandpa helped me build a little 10-gallon still, and basically wouldn't tell me how to do anything. They gave me 2 rules. They said, don't blow your ass up in the backyard, and bring us something good when it's worth drinking. So that's kind of my story, and I've been into it ever since then. Got a little bigger into it in my mid-20s, and built a pretty good size still, and got to the point where our own product was getting back around to us from people that we didn't know. And at some point in time, my now wife said, you need to get your shit together and do this legally or get out of it. So that brings us up to the current. So I'm going to walk you guys around the distillery a little bit here. So we're going to go do basically a full-on tour, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we do as we go. So turn the camera around now. There goes Stephen McNeely doing what Stephen McNeely does. So one of the things that we have that a lot of small distillers don't have, that I really like to show off, is we grind our own grains. Now we just got done grinding out here, so everything's a little messy. But it's important to us to grind our own grains. Our motto here at Spirits of French Lick is respect the grain, and the idea behind that is that grains have terroir just like grapes do. So depending on the type of grain that it is, whether it's corn, oat, wheat, barley, etc., each of those grains is going to taste slightly different from one another. The other part of that is that depending on where that grain is grown and the soil that it's grown in, the environment that it's in, that's going to affect the flavor. So for us, we approach things differently than large distillers do. Large distillers are going to tell you that 60-70% of their flavor profile comes from the barrel. For us, we're more about a blend and balance. We want 50-50. We want 50% raw material, fermentation and distillation, and then we want 50% maturation. We don't do any cheats here. We don't make any liqueurs. We don't ever add any sugar to anything. We never add anything post-distillation except for water and barrel, and that's it. So everything starts out here. These two far bins are our corn bins. Those are typically filled with yellow number 2 corn from Martin or Du Bois or Orange County. Although we do grow 15 to 30 acres of our own corn. Amanda Palmer, which is one that I bred myself and worked on for about 14 years now, across of 150 different open pollinated varieties. We make our estate bourbon out of that corn, and we make about 100 barrels a year usually. Now last year was a terrible year for corn. We only ended up actually making about 20 barrels for this season. So that'll hopefully change this year. The closest bin is usually going to be either rye or wheat, depending upon what we're making at the time. And we typically try to empty the bin, obviously, before we switch products. So now we're doing everything based on bottled and bond. So we're tending to knock out the rye early in the year, in the first season, and the wheat on the second half, and then the opposite direction the second half of the year. So we'll do wheat first and then rye. The wheat's coming from either glick seeds, or we do grow about 15 to 30 acres of wheat a year to use as well. The rye does not do very well in Indiana or Kentucky. There are exceptions to that rule, obviously, but for us, rye is the only grain that we actually treat more like a botanical than a grain. And what I mean by that is that I'm not as concerned with the bushel weight of the rye, as far as grain quality goes, as I am with the aromatics of the rye. You don't get a ton of yield off of rye anyways, so we like to focus more on how the aromatics are going to affect the quality of the whiskey that's finished. So we will shop around for the best rye we can get. We get it from several different foreign countries. We've gotten it from Switzerland, we've gotten it from Germany, we've had it out of Scotland, we've had it out of Canada, and even that other weird country, Pennsylvania. Yeah, that's it. We have occasionally used rye from Pennsylvania. Again, it depends on who has the best stuff out there. So basically the process out here is we weigh out each individual grain into this white scale tank over here. That's going to tell us what the weight of everything is for our mash bill. From there, we're going to then auger over to the seed cleaner, which for many distillers who do have their own grain grinding equipment don't have their own seed cleaner. This is basically an old seed clipper. It's more or less based on a patent from the 1850s that has not changed very much over the years. From there, we're then going to auger everything over to our hammer mill, and that hammer mill is going to turn everything from grain into basically a very fine powder. We like to do a very, very fine grist, try to extract as much of that grain flavor as what we possibly can in order to, again, hold on to our motto of respect the grain. We want to pull all those different flavors out that we possibly can from that grain and have them hold up over time during aging in the barrel. From there, it then goes back down another pipe auger on the back side and then up and into the building where it'll go into our corn cooker, and we'll start the process of converting starch into sugar and subsequently sugar into ethanol for your enjoyment. So now, as I'm going, if you guys have any questions at all, and you've probably been asking, and I haven't been paying that much attention to the comments because I can't talk and read at the same damn time, please feel free to ask and I'll be glad to answer them. So we're going to get ready and head up on the mezzanine now so you can see a nice little overview of the production facility. What's up, Austin Penley? Hope you're doing well, buddy. Flip the camera. You guys don't need to see my ugly face as I climb the steps. So, I always tell people that we are not really a tourist facility. We are a production facility that gives tours. So when you come here on a tour, you're not going to see a lot of big, bright, shiny, squirrely stuff that you see at a lot of the bigger distilleries. So everything here is based on practical distillation. As well, we don't have to have the campus that the big guys do. So our whole town is a campus whenever the tourism thing is going. So people come here from all over the world to go to the casino, check out the dome. The dome is absolutely beautiful. If you're ever here, please go there and check it out. The whole town has a lot of things going on. Animal encounters down at Willstem Ranch. We got a indoor water park. We got the hotel, the casino, the dome. We got Paoli Peak skiing down the way here. There's plenty for everybody to do. A lot of good hiking too if you're into nature, etc. So this is the mezzanine where we bring our tours normally, and everybody can kind of oversee the main area of fermentation and the initial stage of distillation. So, and one of the sad things about this whole virus thing is I'm used to this thing being full on Saturdays. So I usually have, tours of 15 to 20 people up here at a time. Get to meet a lot of interesting people. Get to change a lot of people's minds. You have one guy on a tour that loves craft distilleries, and his 9 buddies may hate him. By the time they leave here, I've usually converted most of them, if not all of them. So again, this is the main production floor. Far side of the catwalk is our corn cooker, and I'll take you all over there and show it to you here in a little bit. But that's where the process really starts. So we're going to start augering all of our grain into that corn cooker and add water to it, just like making grits or oatmeal. We're going to take the temperature up to 190 degrees for an hour and begin to hydrolyze all of that starch. Basically open it up, gelatinize it just like grits, get it ready for conversion from starch into sugar. After that hour hold, we're going to drop to about 170 and add our small grain and hold for 15 to 20 minutes. And then we drop to 145. When we get to 145, we're going to add our barley malt. And all barley malt is barley that's been germinated. When that seed germinates, what happens is it does 2 things. It A, converts its own starch into sugar, and B, creates several different enzymes, alpha amylase and beta amylase in particular. Those enzymes break up the starch bonds into smaller chain sugars. The alpha amylase breaks it off into slightly larger base sugars than what the beta does. The beta then breaks that down into smaller sugars that the yeast can use to convert starch into sugar for the yeast to eat and convert into ethanol and CO2. After that 15-minute hold, we drop down to 90 degrees and we pitch our yeast. Now, one of the things that we do different here is that we use a lot of alternative yeast strains. So we're actually basically using 2 yeast strains for almost every product we make. And when we're not using 2 yeast strains and we're only using 1, we're using very unique yeast strains that nobody else has. And I'm going to come back to that. We've got 6 1,200-gallon fermenters. And what we do is we actually fill 1/2 of each of these fermenters every day of production. The next day we'll fill the second half of it. The reason that we do that is that gives us an opportunity to use those 2 different unique yeast strains to really pull out all the different grain flavors that we want and all the fruity flavors that we want. So for example, on day 1, we will pull a strain that gives us a lot of grain forward characteristics. Day 2, we'll generally drop in a Brandy strain of yeast, and that Brandy strain is going to give us a lot of very fruity esters. A lot of really floral, fruity, very vibrant esters in our whiskey. Now, when I mention fruit and I'm talking about grain, sometimes people think that's a little odd, but if you ever have a good bottle of rye whiskey or high rye bourbon, it almost always has a little bit of a banana nut bread sort of aroma, or even a persimmon pudding sort of aroma to it. All grains have the ability to give those sorts of flavors to the profile of a whiskey. It's just a matter of finding the right circumstances of which to pull them out from. So the other yeast strains that we use, we actually have yeast strains that we've captured from old distilleries here in southern Indiana. So we've captured a strain from the old Mccoy Distillery right down the road in Stampers Creek Township, Orange County, Indiana. The Mccoy Distillery is one of 3 standing buildings representing the 155 previous distilleries that were here in southern Indiana. The other strain that we use is actually from Spring Mill, from the old Daisy Springs Distillery that we captured there. That is probably the best representation of artifacts of a distilling origin in southern Indiana. There are very few artifacts to be found as well. Those guys still have a pot still that was probably built somewhere around 1808 or so. They still have their copper boiler. They still have a barrel branding utensil. And they also, fortunately for us, have several 120-gallon hogshead barrels and staves from previous hogshead fermentation barrels that we were able to swab and get active yeast from. We also have a yeast that we captured from Cave River Valley, which was the site of the old Clifty Distillery that we named our apple brandy after. And then we just came back from St. Louis from some of the lagering caves with a very special yeast for a very special product just specifically for St. Louis. So all the CO2 is vented from these fermenters. Everybody always asks about the closed-top fermenters. We have them for two reasons. One is because I'm next to a winery, and winemakers think that brewers and distillers are bioterrorists. So we don't want anything escaping over here and getting over there in the wine and ruining it. The other reason is because we don't do any traditional sour mashing here. So what we actually do is we will actually use citric acid, or we will use malolactic bacteria to sour our fermentations. The important thing about that is we have a couple of mash bills that are very similar to one another. Actually, the mash bills are exactly the same. The products are differentiated by the way they are distilled, and the way they are matured, and the way they are fermented. So we have a multi-grain whiskey, and we have a multi-grain bourbon. Both have the same 7 grains and the same 7 proportions, but the difference comes in the way that they're fermented. So the multi-grain bourbon is actually fermented using malolactic bacteria. The multi-grain whiskey is actually fermented using the citric acid. We don't want that malolactic getting out of one and into the other, and then we've lost that flavor profile. Citric acid tends to give, what's up, old Dale Bishop? Everybody saying hi. Oh, Dale Bishop! That'll wake you up. Anyways, we don't want that malolactic taking away the profile of the other whiskeys. So it's very important to keep that under control and to keep all of our tanks clean, absolutely. So basically we will ferment our whiskeys for 3 to 5 days, depending on the mash bill and the specific gravity, at about 85 to 88 degrees, although we're slowing that down a little bit now that we're moving away from enzymes and our fermentations are finishing up faster than we would expect them to. Still working our way through that whole ordeal. The other thing that we do obviously back here is we ferment our juice for our brandies. So typically the juice will come back here and we'll ferment that at about 66 degrees for about 2 weeks. And then we also have done rum, which is the coldest fermentation that we do. We actually take that down to 57 degrees for about 17 days. That yeast is a very cool yeast called Bee Fruits. I'm not afraid to give away information to anybody out there. You're never going to replicate anything that we do, and that's okay. So you may make something better than us, who knows. But we have used that yeast as well on all grain fermentations for whiskey projects, etc. So we do have an agitator on this one tank here. We did that because I knew when I came here that we were going to want to run a lot of oats in our mash bills, and oats tend to be a little sticky. The interesting thing is it was not necessary at all for oats whatsoever, but it does speed up our fermentation speed by about 1 day. Jonathan Raynard says, just curious if there were any thoughts on using something different for flavor profiles, most likely not for mass production, but maybe a small batch or experimental brand. Yeah, so we do a lot of that, and when I get back to the barrel room here in a little bit, I'll show you some of that stuff. But so I always tell people we have 4 pillars basically. Our pillars are bourbon, brandy, botanical spirits, and American whiskeys. So botanical spirits being absinthe, aquavit, and gin, and then American whiskey being rye whiskey, single malt whiskey, etc. But there was a 2-year period where, you know, we were still trying to work everything out. We're obviously next door to a winery. We obviously pick up some stuff from them from time to time. So there's literally a section in the warehouse, which is just basically Alan was fucking bored on Tuesday, and here's, you know, 350 gallons of sherry wine that's a little bit off profile. So I don't know what the hell you call distilled sherry wine, but we've made it, and it's really good. So Kyle Leclerc running a mash that has a bit of an unintentional extended bacteria rest thanks to this fucking virus. You guys do any planned bacterial rests? So we actually, we have most of the yeast that we use that are historic, we actually propagate those alongside a malolactic bacteria that came along with them. So malolactic bacteria is about like yeast, it's everywhere out there. So those two strains tend to work very well with one another. Anyways, we're all about pot still distillation, as you all know. That's what I'm in love with. All of our bourbons are always double pot distilled. 90+% of our brandies are always double pot distilled. And there's several reasons for that. The first is that I'm a Luddite. The second is I'm absolutely in love with what pot stills do for a product. There's nothing wrong with column stills. The big guys in Kentucky, they're all making fine stuff, you know, but they're all doing it in a very similar way. So the column still, the low rectification Kentucky column still, was basically a tool of industrial efficiency, and there's nothing wrong with it. It makes great product, but it can limit you in some ways. You know, a lot of the Kentucky guys are using very similar mash bills, they're using very similar yeast, etc. The easy analogy between a pot still and a column still, which I'm going to come to here momentarily, is that basically a pot still is a lot like an acoustic guitar and a column still is a lot like an electric guitar. They're both making music, they're just doing it in two very, very different ways from one another. A little easier to cover up a mistake on an electric guitar because of the amount of input that you have. A little harder to cover up a mistake on a pot still. You fuck up on a pot still, somebody's going to notice that you fucked up. The other thing about pot still distillation is that it's the oldest form of distilling for potable spirits in the world, other than an aquatar. And an aquatar is basically a very primitive version of a pot still. Pot stills are still in use all over the world. You ever get a single drop of single malt whiskey? That's all pot distilled. Has to be legally. You cannot make single malt Scottish whiskey on anything other than the pot still. If you ever have a drink of cognac, you cannot legally make cognac on anything but a pot still. It's actually legislated that those two products have to be made on pot stills. Now bourbon, while it's made primarily nowadays on column stills, was born on the pot still, and we're all about taking it back to the pot still. So, basic process here is we're going to load the beer into the still, bring the temperature to 172.3 degrees. Ethanol is going to boil before water does. That vapor is going to begin to rise and come up to the copper cap. Some of it's going to actually condense on that copper cap and fall back into the still, and as it does so, ethanol vapor is going to meet ethanol liquid in between, and that's going to drive up proof and purity to some extent. That's called reflux. The higher the proof and the higher your purity, the less aromatic the whiskey tends to become, but that's not always the case. There are exceptions to that, but typically it makes a lighter style of whiskey. We don't do anything to force reflux on our bourbons, although we do have the capability to do that. From there, the vapor is going to come across the line arm. We're going to skip that first column, go to the second column. That second column is a shell and tube condenser. And basically what we have is ethanol going through the tubes on the inside of that condenser and cold water circulating throughout the outside of that condenser. That's going to condense all of that ethanol vapor back down into a liquid, and it's going to come down that column and go out the tube on the backside through the wall and collect in a tote in our H3 room next door at about 60 to 70 proof depending on the product. Now, I didn't mention the column to start with because we don't ever use this column out here on this still. I think we might have used it once or twice just for a couple of experiments. So what this column is it's a forced rectification column. Basically what we can do is if we want to raise the proof and the purity of our product to make a lighter style whiskey, we can then run the ethanol vapor into the bottom of this column. That vapor will begin to rise. When it gets to the stainless steel piece, that's what's called a deflator. And what that does is it works as a small condenser. Depending on how much or how little cold water we allow into that condenser, it will condense down more or less alcohol vapor into liquid and drop it back down the column. As that liquid drops back down the column, we can then start closing the valves on the side of the column. Inside each one of those windows, there's what's called a copper bubble plate. We then flood those copper bubble plates and we are forcing vapor ethanol through liquid ethanol, raising the proof and the purity of the product, so that you can actually do a single run distillation and get up to 130, 140 proof if you'd like to. Although we don't ever really do that with this system. We do on one of the stills next door that I'll show you momentarily. We do make some single pass Calvados style apple brandy that way, although it's very rare and we only make maybe a barrel of it a year if we make that amount. So coming back to pot stills, so a lot of people ask about the material the pot still is made out of. So everybody's used to seeing copper stills. So copper is very important to the distillation process. A couple things about it. It is actually a catalyst. So what happens is that copper is positively ionically charged, and there are elements made during fermentation which are negatively ionically charged. Sulfur compounds, SO2, H2S, etc. That copper actually grabs those compounds, drops them out of solution. If you look at that copper right now, it looks smooth, but if you look at it under a microscope, you see little hills and valleys where all those impurities get caught at and get dropped out of solution in order to keep those off flavors and off aromas out of your whiskey. Now, the thing about copper is it's only actually viable in the vapor path during distillation unless you are doing something with extremely high nitrogen content. You tend to see that more in malt whiskey than you do in grain whiskeys. So the beautiful thing about having this thing is that pot stills were not always made out of copper. Copper was used because they sort of had a rudimentary understanding of what the copper was doing for the product, but also because copper was easy to use, it heated up quickly and it cooled down quickly, and it was fairly easy to get a hold of. In the past, pot stills have been made out of all kinds of stuff, anything non-reactive. You know, earthenware, clay pots, etc. That was all common. Wooden pot stills were extremely common. I don't know of any wooden pot stills right now still in use. I know of a few wooden coffee stills that are still around. There may be a wooden pot still down in the Caribbean, if I'm remembering right. I could be wrong on that. But the stainless still actually plays into the chemistry of what we're doing here at Spirits of French Lick. If you remember, we're all about retention and concentration of flavor. That's why we're using pot stills. So what we're actually doing is that we are in the business of creating and maintaining that flavor. And in order to do such, it's all about breaking down long chain fatty acids in the short chain esters and phenols. And those esters and phenols are going to contribute to the flavors of the whiskey that you drink. We have 3 chances to make those esters and phenols. The first is during fermentation, second during distillation, third during maturation. During distillation, it's all about the time that long chain fatty acids spend under heat in the still in order to break them down into those flavor profiles. At my previous distillery, I had a 1,000-gallon copper pot still. I could bring that thing up to temperature in about 35 to 45 minutes and run it off in about 8 hours. This stainless still obviously does not heat or cool as quickly as what that copper pot did. And so it takes me closer to 2 hours to bring this thing up to temperature, and it takes closer to 12 hours to actually run it off, meaning that we're actually breaking down more of those long chain fatty acids into esters and phenols, giving you more flavor in your whiskey. And we have more than enough copper next door in the H3 room to make up for any lack that we would have over here, which I'll show you as well. So I tend to come from a line of very superstitious people. I tend to play into that superstition a lot here at the distillery. One of the things that I play into majorly is that all stills should have names. It's an old Scots-Irish tradition to have your stills named. It's kind of a bad luck thing. It's kind of like getting on a ship that doesn't have a name and sailing it. I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to run a pot still that doesn't have a name. So I tend to name them after women, either biblical characters and or goddesses of antiquity. They're always based on their characteristics because every pot still is different. This is subsequently Lilith, because out of all the stills that I've ever ran in my life, she's been the biggest pain in the ass of any still that I've ever ran in my life. We also have a little 1 gallon, which I'll try to show you momentarily, named Diana, that I use for prototyping. And next door we have Sophia and Inanna. Now Lilith is named after the first wife of Adam, who wouldn't listen to him. Diana is named after the Greek goddess of beauty. Sophia, which is our system that we kind of consider the Swiss Army knife of distillation, because we can pretty much create any kind of product you can imagine in the world on that particular still, is named after Sophia, the Gnostic goddess of wisdom. Inanna, on the other hand, is named after the Babylonian goddess of wheat, grain, and fertility, and Inanna only ever gets used for barrel-aged whiskey and barrel-aged bourbon. One of the other superstitions that we have here is that it's an old tradition for distillers to hide and or bury items of good luck. Think of it similar to a mojo bag that the old blues musicians would carry. So when you come to this distillery, you're going to walk by probably 6 items that have some kind of unique meaning to me and unique meaning to what I'm doing. You be flipping me off over there, Dale. We're doing a live video. Quit. That's what I have to deal with. Anyways, from here we're going to go into the H3 room and we're going to get into the doubling process. And I hope you guys are having a good time so far. Kevin Keltner says just learned something from you again, and I can share with chemistry students about chemistry of heterogeneous catalysts. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it, brother. All right, we're going to go downstairs now. Gris, yeah, what? Nice. I've never done a tour without an audience before, so I know I'm leaving things out, and for that I apologize. But this thing could go on for like 3 hours if you let me talk that long. Look, doesn't he look like a road sign? Looks like a road sign. So you guys will appreciate this. I actually got this from Kathy Coulter Qualkenbush, who originally gave me access to the Mccoy Distillery where I got the yeast. This is one of the very few pictures of a distillery in southern Indiana There are only a handful that I know of. This is the Mccoy Distillery. This was taken, I believe, in May of 1911, right after a tornado went through. So a few really interesting things about this photo, and I love this photo, and that's one reason we did a wall hanging out of it. I consider it inspiration. So again, a tornado had come through and ripped the roof off of the building. At the time that happened, these guys technically should not have been in production and had any alcohol on premises. It all should have been in warehouses, because this would have happened in the springtime. Their season is in the fall. But if you look upstairs, you see a gentleman wearing a white long sleeve shirt, a McCoy, more than likely, possibly George McCoy. Behind him, there is a barrel. Now, what's interesting is I have an account from the McCoys. About a month after this, George McCoy had actually given some peach brandy to local friends and family that was about 3 years old. And I've got money on that it's that barrel that he had squirreled away up there in the top of the distillery. You'll see the 3 boys up top in the overalls. I imagine those are the McCoy boys. And if you look above the door, it says Registered Distillery, McCoy and Company. One of the other really cool things down here in the corner, this is Kentucky Wagon Manufacturing, Louisville, Kentucky. But possibly the neatest thing in here is that this particular picture was taken at a time when the farm distillers are trying to industrialize a little bit more. So they're going from pot stills to a piece of technology that doesn't, it's out there now again, but it disappeared for years and years and years, called a 3-chamber still, which works a little different from both a pot still and a column still. Todd Leopold out at Leopold Brothers is actually running one. And I know my buddy Thomas Earl McKenzie is actually making 3-chamber stills now for sale. So the interesting thing is, this is the only picture I know of an actual 3-chamber still in Indiana, and it's a wooden 3-chamber still. So if you look just to the left of the tree, you'll see what looks like a barrel right there. That's the top of a wooden 3-chamber still. All right, this is where I spend about 90% of my time. So we do have, obviously, a little bit of computerization here at the distillery, which I'll show you momentarily. But everything distilling-wise is still done in the old sensory fashion, by taste, smell, touch, etc. So I spend most of my time in front of these stills, checking the proof, smelling things, touching things, seeing, making sure that the cuts happen the way that they're supposed to happen. Right now we're actually running the very last batch of our heirloom bourbon, our Amanda Palmer estate bourbon, on Inanna. Inanna is a 650-gallon hybrid pot still with a 4-plate column. We obviously do not actively run the column when we're making our bourbons or whiskeys, although we have done some contract distilling for some lighter products where we do actively run the column. What we do, however, on this system is we actually fill that column up with copper, so we have that much more copper surface area. And in most of the time, although not today, I will reroute the vapor to actually go through this copper gin basket, which I also have filled with copper. I tend to like to have a lot of rises and falls during distillation. The more of those I can get, it seems the better product that I make over time. Just trying to read comments at the same time. I apologize for that. So going from there, we'll walk over here to Sophia. Sophia is the Swiss Army knife of distillation. So if you can imagine a product in the world, we can pretty much replicate it on this particular system. And this is my favorite still by far of any that I've ever run. Now, Inanna is the easiest still that I've ever run. You can pretty much set her, and as long as you check her every once in a while, she's happy. Sophia, on the other hand, makes you work for it. So again, they all have names for a reason. They're all different from one another. And typically they're named after women because pot stills have curves, and I tend to think that women should have curves as well. So one of the interesting things about pot stills is that you can have 5 pot stills made by the same manufacturer, run in the same building, run by the same person, all running the same exact product at the same time, and all of them are going to turn out a completely different product. I love Sophia because you got to really be on top of her. You got to really be paying attention to what she's doing. You can't just walk away from this system because there's too much going on even in pot still mode. She does what she wants to do, how she wants to do it. But Sophia gets used for all of our white products, all of our botanical products. some whiskey here and there, and every drop of brandy we ever make will always come off of Sophia. So number of options: 350 gallon copper pot still alembic, offset gin basket, 8-plate whiskey column, 12-plate vodka column, shell and tube condenser. So the gin basket gets used for botanicals when we're doing absinthe aquavit or gin. Most of our botanicals go into the pot in the 70 proof ethanol for 18 to 24 hours for maceration, but some of them give off too many oils that are very perfumey when you do that, particularly citrus peels and then also floral elements. So I tend to put those into the gin basket, reroute the vapor from the still into the bottom of the gin basket, and then imbue the spirit with those properties from there, bypassing the 8-plate and the 12-plate. Now when we make our single pass Calvados, we'll actually put the apple wine into the still, reroute the vapor into the bottom of this column, turn the deflator on slightly, and run the bottom 4 plates and hold our proof at about 125 to 130. If we're going to make high proof ethanol, for instance, for hand sanitizer right now, we would run both these columns in conjunction. Now I cannot hold 192 proof on these columns. It's a batch still. It's going to lose proof in ethanol as it runs, but I can hold 192 proof for an extended amount of time. It is the most boring job on the face of the planet. It turns a normal 8 to 10 hour day into a 17-hour day, so I try to avoid that where possible. Now we do make 4 different cuts here. It's a little different from what you'll see at most distilleries. We do a 4-shot cut, we do a heads cut, and we do, 4 shots, heads, hearts, and tails. So 4 shots are about the first 2 gallons. A lot of methanol that comes off at the very beginning. That stuff we typically use as sanitizer around here in the distillery to wipe down stainless steel surfaces, etc. The heads and whiskey, there's still a lot of good flavor there. You can recycle those. It's acetaldehyde, ethyl acetate, smells a little bit like fingernail polish remover, but that stuff breaks down with time and heat. So we put it back into the stripping still of the same product next time we're going to run it, reclaim that alcohol at least 5 times. After the 5th time, then we throw it out and get rid of it completely. We start over fresh. The hearts is your potable alcohol that you're going to drink, bottle, age, etc. And then your tails are the fraction at which you end up with more water than you do ethanol. Your tails is actually where most of your consistency in pot still distillation comes from. Because the thing about pot still distilling is that you really don't create consistency with a pot still. What you do is you manage it over time, because there's too many environmental factors that affect pot still distillation. So you have to blend things together, you have to hold on to certain fractions, rerun them, etc., reintroduce them into the system. So everything in the world affects a pot still. And I meant to mention this out there by Lilith, but I've not done a tour for a while, so I didn't get into it. Some more of my superstitious bullshit. But barometric pressure will affect a pot still. If you have a storm front come through, it'll actually slow a pot still down, just like putting the brakes on it. The mood of the distiller affects a pot still. If you come in a good mood, you're going to make a certain style of whiskey. You come in a bad mood, you're going to make a different style of whiskey, because the cuts are not always the same. It's also determined by, what you've eaten, as well as whether or not you're sick. Things of that nature affect the flavor coming from a pot still. And the big one that gets people all the time, they think I'm crazy, but I've got it written down for the past 6 or 7 years now, is moon phases. Moon phases affect pot still distillation. If you think about it, a pot still is nothing but the tool of an alchemist, and all the alchemists were really trying to do is to recreate the processes of evaporation and condensation in a sealed vessel. As such, you have a standing body of water. Every single standing body of water on the face of this planet is affected by the moon. High tide, low tide, creeks, rivers, fish. Humans, if you're in law enforcement or healthcare, you know that the full moon affects things. A pot still will run a little faster in a full moon than it does in a new moon. Eventually I will graph that out so that people can see that. So from there, we obviously go into our barrel. We are currently using, does the copper have to be replaced periodically? Yes, eventually you will wear thin spots in your copper, and those do have to be repaired or replaced for sure. All right, so this is where we fill our barrels at. We are using barrels from Zach Cooperage. They are in the old Atherton Distillery down in Kentucky. We love those guys. They gave us a great price on barrels. In my opinion, they make the best barrels out there. I've not had any real problems with these barrels. And they also were using the groove stave technology. So the groove stave means that on the inside of these staves, there are grooves that are cut into them, so that when they char these barrels, it actually just toasts the inside of the groove. So we're getting a good mix of toast and char. We like a nice medium toast. We use a number 2 char. The reason we use a number 2 char is because, again, our motto is respect the grain. So we want that balance, that 50-50 balance between distillation and maturation. Subsequently, if we went with a number 3 or 4 char, we're going to overrun the whiskey that we're making because it's a little lighter style than a lot of other whiskeys out there. We need that balance. Number 2 also gives a lot more lignin, which gives a lot of toasted coconut and a lot of toasted hazelnut sort of aromas and flavors, and that matches the fruity profile of whiskey that we like to make. The other thing in this H3 room is, and I'm trying to hurry along here a little bit, guys, because my phone's getting close to dying. These are our blending vats. So they're actually beer fermenters, but they work great for what we're doing. We do not do any chill filtration whatsoever. Jonathan, how long or how often does copper wear out and need repaired or replaced? Well, we just did a scan on all of our stills and everything is holding up really well right now. Typically, I think about 10 years or so for certain pieces of copper, you know, the helmets, the heads, etc. There are places that wear a little thinner. The shoulders tend to wear a little bit thinner. The scary thing is that if the shoulders get thin, I've heard stories about this, the actual copper will start to breathe. So you'll look at the shoulders and you'll see them do this, and that's bad. So they don't explode, they implode, and then they explode, which is no fun. So anyhow, on these, we don't do any chill filtration whatsoever. So chill filtration's what a lot of the big guys do. They want a bottle that sits on the shelf, doesn't haze up when it gets cold. And there's nothing wrong with that, and chill filtration can actually be a positive to some products without a doubt. We don't do any chill filtration here because we want what you taste out of our bottle to be as close to what it can be coming out of the barrel or off the still whatsoever. When I replace the copper, do I change the still's name? You know, maybe. It depends on how she reacts, possibly. You know, if she changes, I might for sure. So instead of chill filtering, what we do is we actually have to proof down extremely slowly. One of the other reasons that big guys chill filter is they tend to be in a hurry to get product out the door, so they add a lot of water at one time. When you add all that water to drop your proofs from, say, 120 down to 90 or even 80, you actually cause a haze to form, and that haze basically is long-chain fatty acids falling out of suspension. Unfortunately, when you do that, what you end up with is you end up tasting and smelling soap because you have created soap molecules. It's called saponification. The only way to avoid that is to proof down extremely slowly. If I don't want to chill filter, I got to proof extremely slowly. So I'll drag my barrels down. If I need to come from, let's call it 105 down to 100, or let's call it 110. That's closer to our warehouse, what we've got right now. 110 to 100. I need to know a couple weeks ahead of time. It's going to take me a couple weeks to proof that down. So I'm going to drain everything out of the barrel, pump it into the tank, aerate it, and then I'm going to drop the proof maybe 3 to 5 proof points a week until I get to where I'm going, and no more than that. With brandy, it's even more important because brandy saponifies really easily. So our Hoosier Apple brandy, although it was only 2 years old, aged in the barrel, it was actually in these tanks going through the tank aging process, as I call it. And we do call it aging because these tanks are open to the air to some extent, so there is some micro-oxidization that happens. It went through that process for more than a full year to get to where it was going. And that was proofing it down extremely slowly, a couple proof points at a time every couple weeks. And we feel like that really helps the process a lot. All right, we're gonna walk out here now and get over to the warehouse. So being a family-owned distillery, and I like to joke around with people when I'm on tour and tell them kind of silly stories, but being a family-owned distillery, we sometimes get goofy things stored back here. So one of the goofy things we have is this tree stump up here. Now, one of the owners brought this in here a couple years ago and was going to make a table out of it. For a long time, it sat right there in that corner next to that red post. And just about always on a Saturday, I'll have a tour with 20 or 30 people on it. And out of that 20 or 30 people, there will be one person that's 22, 23 years old that thinks they know more about my art than I do. And they'll talk shit at the back of the crowd, and they'll talk to their friends and this and that and the other, or they'll ask dumb questions because they think they know more than what they do. And if you are that person, I will make an example of you. I will make fun of you throughout the entire tour. Don't talk on my tour. I kicked Jennifer Lawrence off a tour at Copper and Kings one time. I'll kick you off a tour too if I have to, if you get out of control. So this kid had been at me all morning on this tour. We walk out, he sees this tree stump laying there, and he asked me about the tree stump. So I've gotten a little bit more into you know, some of the superstitious beliefs that I have about distillation and stuff on those tours. In person, it's a little easier to get into that stuff and explain it. When he asked about the tree stump, before I could realize what I was saying, I said, you remember that heirloom corn we talked about earlier? And he goes, yeah. I said, that's our lucky tree stump. And he goes, what the hell you mean lucky tree stump? And I said, we take that tree stump and we got a pestle and mortar and we put it out there and we take 10% of that heirloom corn for every batch that we make and we grind it in a pestle and mortar for good luck. I didn't think anything else of it. Everybody else kind of laughed. I didn't think he took it seriously. About a year later, I was looking online and I found his website. And on his website, he talks about our lucky tree stump. So now the lucky tree stump has become part of the heirloom bourbon story, and we'll probably be dragging that damn thing around with us to festivals anytime that we have the heirloom bourbon out there in a couple years. So we're gonna bring a pestle and mortar and mortise and pestle, however you say that. Yeah, mortise and pestle, and we'll have you guys grind corn for us. So moving on over here, we're gonna go into the first of our two warehouses, and I'm gonna move through this part pretty quick because my phone's getting real low on battery. So we have two very unique warehouse situations, very different from anything you're gonna see anywhere else. The first is this, what we call our chai. This is a lot more like a brandy cellar than it is a traditional warehouse you'd see in Kentucky. The temperatures in here tend to range 30 to 40 degrees throughout the year. We do not control those temperatures. Those are passive heating and cooling from the billing, basically. We also, Jeffrey Muller and I can be the dedicated tree stump movers. Hell yeah, I definitely need that. I don't want to move that stump around, that's for sure, but it is a hell of a story. Typically very high humidity in here. This is a lot like a brandy cellar. So typically a lot higher angel share or evaporation than what you're gonna get at most other distilleries. It's actually enough angel share that it'd probably get me fired from about anywhere else. But it gives us the retention and concentration that we want in the product. So our angel share is about 7% a year versus the 2 to 3% in Kentucky. But that's how we're able to make products that are a little younger, taste better than they should for the age that they are. So all that retention and concentration coming from that barrel has given us a lot of that flavor. The other thing that we do is we do low barrel entry proof, so 105 on most things. 105 because water is actually a better solvent on ethanol or on wood than ethanol is. So we're able to actually extract more at a lower proof from the barrel than we would be at a higher proof. And again, with that number 2 char, it's a lot of that lignin, that toasted coconut, that toasted hazelnut that really gives us a unique flavor. Now, we don't use any small barrels. We have one small barrel that we got from Ann Gray Cooperage, and I'll tell you that if I was going to use small barrels, that's the only small barrel manufacturer that I would probably buy from. Everything else here is 53 gallons or larger. Obviously for bourbon and rye, it's New American Oak. But we have a number of odd barrels too. So these are once used French red wine barrels that then went to Mexico and had tequila in them for a year. We made an apple brandy in 2017. We cut it like we would a clear liquor, very little heads, very little tails, actually no heads or tails. We put it in that barrel, and the idea is that we are going to release a very unique one-off this coming fall, apple brandy matured in a tequila barrel. And all it's gonna be is a little bit of a straw color with a little bit of that tequila tonality into it. High humidity, keep Odell out of there, his hair will be out of control, right? Right, that's awesome. So we also have some Scottish Hogsheads back here. These are 68 gallon, once used bourbon barrel staves on the side, New American Oak on the front. There are a number of very odd projects back here. We got some Catawba brandy, fall 2017. I believe we got some 2016 as well. We've got some beer barrels back here. We've got some port barrels, some sherry barrels, a few Copper and Kings barrels. You can tell by the orange over there. We've got aquavit aging in different barrels. We've got absinthe aging in several different barrels. We actually have a New American Oak aged absinthe that will be coming out here shortly called Fascination Street that a good friend of ours, Mark Baxter, did some artwork for us on. The other warehouse is a lot more like a Scottish style dunnage. It's across the road and up on the hill. Barrels are only stacked 4 high over there, just like they are here. Good ventilation all the way around. Gets up to about 110 degrees in there in the summertime. It'll hold about 3,000 barrels. This warehouse holds about 1,200 barrels, all double pot distilled, all our make, obviously. And we will continue to double pot distill and make everything ourselves as long as I'm here. So we don't know how long everything will be aged. Obviously, it depends on you know, the circumstances and the product. We know that everything from this point forward will be at least bottled in bond as far as the bourbons go, and the potentially a lot of the apple brandies as well. Brad King asked, do I still have my Chardonnay barrel? So I do have it. I refilled it with something. I can't remember what it was. We actually just bottled that Lee W. Sinclair in the Chardonnay barrel to go out to an account in northern Indiana that is still wanting it in the middle of all this. So that's the good thing from us, our distiller point of view, is that people are still ordering things. Even on-premise accounts are still buying barrels. So, yep, Jeffrey, the bottled and bond is coming out this summer. 4-year-old Lee W. Sinclair, 4-year-old Maddie Gladden high rye bourbon. So that's something else I didn't mention. During the aging process, does the youngest barrel start on top or the bottom? No, Jonathan, I don't really get into that too much. So we've not been here long enough to really experiment with that. So it depends, again, on product. We know enough at this point about the warehouse to know that there are differences in flavor between the barrels on the front side and the back side, or the front side and the back side, the top, the bottom, and the middle. But we don't know well enough yet how that is affecting things. Also, we sort of have catered ourselves to being a single barrel company in a lot of ways, because we can do a lot of things that other companies can't. So we know that we make a different style of whiskey in the summertime than we do in the wintertime. This goes back to pot still dynamics. In the wintertime, it's a little colder. In the distillery, it takes longer for that still to heat up. The copper cools off quicker. We get a little more reflux, make a little lighter style whiskey. In the summertime, we don't get that. We get a heavier styled whiskey. We also very purposely barrel everything every single day. So when I was at Copper and Kings, we would distill everything, put it in a tank, blend it together for consistency, and then barrel it. Here, we're barreling everything every single day in order to make sure that we have some variation in our products so that people can come in and find a very unique single barrel for their account and their purposes that does not match the things that are already on the shelf from us. So, and that gets into using those different alternative yeasts. We do make what we call targeted single barrels. We don't know that they'll be great barrels 4 years from now, 6 years from now, whatever, but we throw a different yeast in and do a higher barrel entry proof at 118 in order to kind of throw the profile of our normal whiskey off a little bit so that people have something a little different to taste as a potential single barrel. So yeah, no problem. Anybody else got any questions? I mean, I'll talk all day long. It's weird talking on the phone just because I'm so used to having people here that I can kind of cut up with and hang out with, you know. We will sell some used barrels to the general public that, you know, that we can't get more use out of. We are basically going to reuse barrels as many times as we can. So we obviously don't just make bourbon, we make brandy, botanical spirits, other whiskeys. So our barrels get a little bit more of a lifespan than most do. So we'll actually go from bourbon to, say, rum, single malt whiskey, apple brandy, then from there into botanicals. After that, we'll have them shaved down 1/8 of an inch and recharred, and then we'll use them, you know, 2 more times after that. And then we might take them down to neutral and use them as a storage device, potentially. So, what's up, Julie? But we will have extra barrels here and there. Potentially this summer, we may have some extra barrels to sell to the public, and I'll update Facebook whenever we have that happen. Brian Murphy says, Alan, where the heck can someone get a copy of your Alchemist Handbook that Royce Neely is always talking about? Well, it is available as a PDF online. If you look up Alchemist Cabinet, Volume 1 Philosophy, you should be able to find a link to a PDF, or if you'll message me in a little while, I will send you a link to that. My hope is to actually eventually republish that thing and put it back out there as a physical copy again. I've been working on part 2 and part 3 for some time now. Part 2 is going to have a lot of recipes in it, a lot of methodology in it, and it's going to go deep into Rick Gibson's Tennessee Thumper Still, the one that he built the Reverend Thomas Green edition, and how that Tennessee Thumper still can be used to infuse flavor, raise proof and purity, and also to replicate a 3-chamber still, which we find pretty interesting, or a rum still with multiple retorts. So look out for those. Volume 3 is going to be a lot more of the history stuff. Here comes old Del Bishop in his bright orange shirt to give me some kind of bad news, I'm sure. Huh? That's fine. Ain't hurt nothing. Yeah, you're good. Turn the condenser for Lilith on. That'll bring the temperature down. So, Again, it is a working distillery, so have to answer questions and all that stuff as I go. But tell us again what's coming out this summer. So this summer we've got our Maddie Gladden. Oh, that's where I was going. I remember now. We've got our Maddie Gladden High Rye Bourbon, bottled in bond. We've got our Lee Sinclair bottled in bond. This fall we should have apple brandy aged in tequila barrel. Early next year we will switch our Weeder bourbon over to a brand called William Dalton. William was the first distiller, or was not the first distiller, but was the longest tenured distiller at a distillery in Indiana that I know of. He worked at the Daisy Spring Distillery for 55 years and made a mash bill very similar to that. Again, Spirits of French Lick isn't just the spirits local, the spirits in the bottle, but it's the spirits of the local place. We've got our Fascination Street Absinthe coming out. That's a small batch, 2 barrels that we actually filtered through Amethyst. I'll let you decide whether that means anything to you or not. We have a number of things lined up that we can come out with next year, including a 4-year-old buckwheat bourbon. We will have at least 2 barrels of rye whiskey that we'll release this year, single barrels to 2 accounts if they want them. The mainline rye whiskey, which is based on the old George Washington mash bill, will not come out until next year because I don't want to release it at the same time I release the high rye bourbon and get them confused. Real quickly before we take off, I will tell you the origins of Lee Sinclair for those that don't know. So we tend to name things after local I'll get this out in a minute, local places and people. And nobody ever gets the first 3 bottles of those historic labels. The first 3 bottles of those historic labels always go to the people, the descendants of the people, or to places that pay tribute to those people. So Lee W. Sinclair was a business owner in Washington County. He owned New Albany and Salem State Bank. He owned several different mills. He also eventually moved over here to Orange County and bought the old West Baden Hotel. A year later it burnt down. His daughter convinced him to rebuild it, and he decided if he was going to do it, he was going to make it a spa, and he wanted to call it the Carlsbad of America. And so he went and he found, talked to every engineer he could about building this giant dome that went onto the building, and everyone said that it was impossible until he found a guy in his 20s who said, yeah, I can do that. And they made it happen. It was the largest freestanding dome in the world for years and years and years until the Superdome was built. So we are on Sinclair Street. I'm from the same county as Sinclair. This town wouldn't be here without Sinclair, so we wanted to pay tribute to him, obviously. Therefore, we named our first bourbon Lee W. Sinclair. Now, Maddie Gladden, which is coming out, which is the first label that I know of named after a specific woman in bourbon, and I could be wrong on that, I don't know. But she was tied into Lee Sinclair. She was his housekeeper as a teenager. At some point in time, she took off for Chattanooga, Tennessee. She started a cat house in Chattanooga and one in Nashville. She fell in love with P.T. Barnum, became his mistress. Eventually, P.T. kind of got tired of her and paid her off to leave. She took the money, moved back to Salem, Indiana, built a cat house on Main Street in Salem, Indiana. She was married 5 times. 3rd husband and the 5th husband were once and the same. After the 3rd husband and her divorced the 1st time, he broke into her house and she shot him in the face with a .38 caliber. A year later, they were married again. If that's not the best bourbon story out there, I don't know what is. So, but guys, I hope you enjoyed. We'll try to do some other stuff where we can here on Facebook, etc. Keep things as normal as what we can. We're gonna keep these stills rolling as long as we possibly can. Keep making hand sanitizer for the locals and also emergency services. So thank you all for tuning in. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a few things. I hope you keep buying our products. Listen, we're available in Indiana through Johnson Brothers distribution. If your local store doesn't have it, ask for it through Johnson Brothers. We're available in Kentucky through Heritage Spirits. Ask for it down there. We're in Missouri with Show Me. We'll be in Illinois with Show Me Spirits. Big thanks to the ABV Network and Steve Akeley for that. We just went into Texas with a single barrel down to Liquor King. We have 2 single barrels lined up for Total Wine and Spirits, one in Brentwood, Missouri, and one in Illinois. We are potentially sending more single barrels to Texas and going into full distribution in Texas with full clip distributors. And then always check out Sillbox.com. Sillbox ships to like 30-something states, so they may be able to ship our products directly to you, and they have most of our products. So, all right, guys, I'm gonna jump off here. And again, I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. And you guys take care of each other, take care of your neighbors. I love y'all, and I'll talk to you later.
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.